recording on. Progress. And so, whichever one you want to see, you can think about it and let me know once we're done with the actual official information. So, but I guess before we start, want to check in. Any questions? Anyone want to show me their, what their Marguerite?
I just have a comment in that I used the zipper foot that I got from you for the first time. Game changer.
Yes.
It truly, I didn't realize it until I used it. And what makes it different from the others, as you know, is that it's adjustable and it's just beautiful. It really makes a difference. Yeah.
Thank you.
It's fun to use.
Because, honestly, I mean, it's the old school foot, but yeah. And at FIT, thankfully, I found out that they actually make a high shank version that fits on industrial machines. And it's so funny because the students, the mechanics say, oh, that's a home sewing foot. And I say to them, it's a sewing foot. Yeah. It fits on this machine. It does so much. So yes. Yes, thank you. Yes. So Michelle, question.
I did what you said for the dart in the sleeve, and it ended up being one simple fisheye just below the elbow on the inside. And it went from looking like a frumpy mess to me running around the apartment going, oh my God, he's an evil genius for 20 minutes.
No, honestly, it wasn't my idea. This is, and I tell my students this, I say to them every week, and I know they roll their eyes. You learn about clothing by looking at clothing, and every single garment that comes in my hands, I look at. And I saw that on that coat. I actually took a pattern from that coat. I have a pattern from that coat because it was really quite wonderful. It was, I would say, probably early 30s based on the sleeve and such. But that was just, it was such a lovely detail, but it gave the sleeve such a nice hang, because
it cleaned up a lot. Well, and I didn't even need 3, just 1.
Yeah,
like it's done. Don't do it.
See, most people don't a simple observation, and we probably all have noticed this, that when your arms are hanging at your side, they don't hang stick straight. No. They bend slightly at the elbow. It's physiology. And so my teacher was very big on anatomy and what does the body do here? And so having that little tiny bit of a shape just makes all the difference. So I'm glad you used that.
Are you ever going to release any of those patterns you've taken off?
Probably. I don't know. See, that I'm a little bit torn by that because you see, technically, the intellectual property contained within the pattern is I don't own it.
Okay, and I can see why that way.
Yeah, and you see, as someone who, I would be very annoyed if someone took something I designed and took a pattern from it. And it happens, and I'm not going to name any names. There are some names that we all have probably heard that have basically made a living from taking patterns from other people's garments. Just don't.
I didn't know if it had been considered because it was decades old, if that was enough time to it be inspiration.
No,
not too much. Okay.
And also there are other people doing that. So, for me, it just doesn't feel right for me because fair is fair. I didn't come up with the idea. So, what I do sometimes, and I tell my students this because one of the things I can do, and you all may or may not know this, but I have that method for taking a pattern from an existing garment using silk organza. That is so accurate. I have there's the Yves Saint Laurent jacket that I copied because I hated the lapels, loved the shape. It made me look like I have a shape. And the jacket I made was the muslin. I didn't have to make it in a muslin and adjust it. It is that accurate. So all I had to do is just draft all the corollary pieces and throw it together. And I figured, hey, if this doesn't work, I'll just call it a muslin. And it worked. So I encourage people to do that. If you have something you really love in your closet and you want to duplicate it, I think that's a fair use. If you want to figure out from a pattern making standpoint how they achieved something, I think that's a fair use. but selling it, then it's like that for
That
me.
goes over. Okay.
That
And that's something I would want to ask, like a teacher at FIT versus somebody at Joanne's who would say, yeah, do it, because then we'll all get the pattern. And it was,
yeah. And like I said, there are people who have made their careers copying other people's patterns and copying other people's garments. And I'm not going to name names, but you know, they know who they are, and I guess they can sleep at night. So call me old fashioned, you know, it's just what it is. So, okay. So other questions or comments or, okay. So let us finish this jacket, and then we'll decide what the other thing we want to watch. I know it's sort of like, you know, like movie night. Okay, so next up, oh, there we are. We want to finish the seam allowances on the underarms. This is both for comfort and for beauty. This is essentially French binding, as we did on the edges. So let's get busy. We begin by cutting bias strips from the binding fabric, 1.5 inches wide. And then we will take these over to the pressing table to press. Essentially what we're going to be doing here is making a little French binding under the armholes.
I have a question.
Yes, go ahead.
Kenneth, I'm looking at the fabric on the screen,
Yes.
and I remember that the binding that is around the jacket and the cuffs on the sleeves is reinforced in the back. Is this that's going to go in the underarm? Is that reinforced on the back?
I believe
is that
it is.
fused?
Yes, I think I just used this because I block fused the entire piece. So this should have the fusing on the back.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. As we did before, we press to crack the bias. And then press the two cut edges together, wrong sides together. Okay. From here, I like to press in about 1/4 inch. And then measure from that 6 inches. So this 6 inches here. And then you can also press another 1/4 inch like so. And cut this off. Press that in as well. That's going to finish these ends nicely. Okay, so we make one of these for each underarm. I will meet you back at the work table. So this here is what we will bind. So we start, I like to hit the ends first and then distribute the rest. So we pin that in here. And that end here. And then the middle. Because this is a bias, you can kind of massage that into position. So we're lining up, as you can see, we're lining up the cut edges of the bias strip with the cut edges of seam allowance on the underarm. So we have everything pinned. Next, I'll meet you at the sewing machine. So as you can see here, I put on my quilting foot, which means this edge of the foot is 1/4 of an inch from the needle. So this is 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. And put the needle down right there. And sew this at 1/4 of an inch. Not a race, you can go slowly. Almost done. So let me take this out of the machine, show you the results. So there, now the object here is we're going to bring this up and over. This is a French binding, but I will take this back to the work table to show you how to do that. So here we are back at the work table. And this is where, before I actually start pinning this, I just want to see if everything is going to come up and over. And so you can see here, it's a little bit too narrow. And I intentionally did this because I really want you to see that you can fix this. So what I'm going to do here is just come in and trim out some of this seam allowance. Because you've got a lot of thicknesses here, that absorbs some of the turnip cloth that we have. So I'm just trimming it down to, I'd say about 1/8 of an inch. If it's a little bit too narrow, that's not going to kill you. It's better a little bit too narrow than a little too wide. So now this comes up and over. And so then that actually hits that stitching line. Come in and pin. So again, I like to pin the ends and the middle and then work in from there. There's the middle. Now you could use, as your binding, a silk organza if you wish. You could also use some of the tool that you lined it with. I like using what we bound it with because I just think it's pretty. You know what's in there. That's all that matters. No one else will see this.
There we are. Now, we will finish this the same way as we finished the binding around the edge. So I prepared threaded needle. And this you could sew with a slip stitch or a fell stitch. That is not really crucial because this is going to be on the inside of the sleeve, so you don't really see it. This is a hand finish. We'll sew 2 or 3 stitches and then I will take it off camera. 1 more stitch, then I'll take it off camera. Okay, so that's the finishing. I will take this off camera and finish it and bring back the results. Okay, here we are. Let me show you the result. That's on the inside. This is on the outside. So one last step to finish this is at the pressing table. To finish this up, we just want give it a little steam and press so that it shapes. So there we have it. The underarm is bound. Let's go back to the work table. So here we have the underarm seams bound on the lace jacket. You know what this means? This means we remove our basting, we give it a steam, and we will be finished. And here we are, our finished jacket. All of the bastings removed. I've steamed out everything just to make it set all the seams. But here we have it. So now let's take a look on the inside so you can enjoy the work that we've done. As you can see here, whoa, the seams pretty much disappear. That's really the only seam you see at the underarm. So yeah, there we have it. I hope you've enjoyed the class, and I thank you for attending.
Ta-da! Yay!
Yay!
Yeah, the lady who got this was very happy that she got a free lace jacket out of the whole thing.
Yeah, I can't imagine her complaining about that.
Well, you know, it's really funny because, you know, I did the raglan coat class too, and I called a friend and I said, okay, would you like a coat? And, you know, she there was this long pause. She was like, what does this mean? I said, I will let you choose the fabric, and I need you to send me some measurements, but when this is done, you get yourself a free coat. And so she was, you know, because I have a lace jacket. I have plenty of those raglan coats. I mean, I have sent several of them to the Goodwill because, you know, I can only wear so many. So yeah, you know, I mean, there comes a time where it's like, I'm done with this particular coat. So yeah, it was nice to actually make something for her because she was very pleased, and so was I. So questions, comments, thoughts?
Did that one? I'm going to do the floating snap placket that we had already discussed.
Mm-hmm.
Did that one have any closures, or was it just meant to just throw over a shell.
Yeah, it meets at the center front, but
And that's it. Okay.
but yeah, that floating snap closure thing, I have to say, it really, because I think I may have mentioned this. I like those beaded jackets from the 80s, and what's fun is to wear one of those with just a torn up white t-shirt and torn up jeans and really good boots. But the hooks and eyes are vicious. They snag on everything, and they'll just rip the thing to shreds if you leave them there. So the floating snap thing is and I need to make a video on that. I should do that soon. So yeah.
And then I'm going to do yours, and then I'm going to do the modification. So I'm calling it a floating snap placket, basically.
Okay, that's
But
fair.
it's your thing. Just I want a longer strip just because I'm hard on stuff. So
That's
I don't
entirely,
care.
because you see, what I love about technique is I regard techniques as tools. You have a sewing machine, you have really good cutting tools, you have a good iron, and you have what I call the bag of tricks. And I tell my students these things, so that when you're in a situation, you can kind of rummage through your bag of tricks and say, okay, I could use this, but I could use it in this way, and it will serve me better.
For XYZ. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so would you all like to see how to sew with the bobbin thread?
Oh, yes.
Okay, so this is so damn cool. I showed my students Monday in class, and really, honestly, you would think that I had like pulled a rabbit out of a hat, but here we go.
Sheer fabrics are less forgiving than solid opaque fabrics. So when you're sewing seams like tucks or darts in a sheer fabric, one thing you want to concern yourself with is the end of that stitching. Now, I'm bringing this in for a very tight close-up because this is what's called sewing with the bobbin thread. Notice that there is no two little thread ends or whiskers. It is because the entire stitch, the seam, is sewn just with the bobbin thread. So let's see how that's done. To illustrate what we're trying to avoid by learning this technique, I will first sew a tuck the way people normally would. This is a 1/2 inch from the folded edge. I'm stitching it through paper, but generally people will and then back tack. What you run into here is these two thread ends. And I'm going to tear away the paper so you can get a good sense of what it looks like right on this end here. So the paper is torn off, and what you have is this back tack, and you have two little whiskers on either end of that stitch. So if you're okay with that, I'd say muzzle tov, but I'm going to show you a different way so that the stitch just ends with no mass of thread. So to orient you here, how we sewed this one is we started here and we stitched down to there where we wanted the tuck to end. But in the method we're going to be learning, we're going to begin, we're essentially working backwards. We're going to start where we want it to end and sew back in the opposite direction. We will shorten the stitch length to 0. Once we shorten the stitch length to 0, we put the fabric under the foot. And what I like to do is pull this thread forward because you don't want the foot sitting on it for the next step. So we have the bobbin thread pulled forward. We'll put the foot down. And then we walk the machine one stitch. This is why we don't want the feed to engage. We don't want the fabric to move. And So what we're going to do here is we're bringing the bobbin thread through the fabric. So once we bring the bobbin thread through the fabric, to pull up about, I'd say about 3 feet of thread in preparation for the next step. From here, we're going to unthread the needle. And then we're going to thread the needle backwards. If the needle threads front to back, this threads back to front. So we thread the needle backwards.
Now I'm going to stop here for a moment and just say, I was doing this looking through the camera. So I have to say, you know, that was quite a feat being able to thread that damn needle looking through the camera, but there you have it. So.
Next, we tie the 2 thread ends together. And then what we're going to do here is pull backwards on the top thread, the blue thread. And what's going to happen is that it will pull everything backwards through the tension so that we will have, as you can see, the orange thread is continuous. It starts on the bobbin, it comes up backwards through the needle, it threads all the way up, and you can see it's gone through all of the escapements on the machine, and you have extra hanging off here. And next, the magic begins. Lengthen your stitch to 1.5 in preparation for sewing. Next, you just start sewing slowly. This is what you have. You have one continuous thread. Now let me tear away the paper, and I will bring it back and show you the result. And here is the result. The stitching line just stops, quite unlike what we did before. Now, you may think this is splitting hairs, but really this particular technique separates ready to wear from couture. This technique could also be used to sew darts. You would start at the point of the dart and sew back towards the wide portion. But this, as you can see by the name, is called sewing with the bobbin thread. Now, one little bit of information, you will have to set all of this up for every single tuck that you're going to be doing. You have to go through this process for every single one, but to get the results you need, it's worth it.
Ta-da.
Wow.
That finally makes sense, because I had heard of it and I'd seen somebody try to explain it and I just was like, I have no idea what they just did. I'm surprised their machine's not broke.
Yeah. Well, you know, this is one time years ago, I was I teach the couture techniques at FIT, and in the evening class, I had a guy in there who was the workroom manager at Oscar de la Renta.
Whoa.
And I showed him this, I showed the class this, and he said, "Oh," and I said,
Mm.
"What does that mean?" And apparently his seamstresses said that takes a special machine. One of them had one of it at home, and so like extra, and I'm like, that works on any machine. And so next time they tell you that, you sit them down and you say, actually, it doesn't take a special machine, and we're not going to be paying someone to take this home and sew those anymore. Knowledge is power.
And money.
Yeah.
So I've been sewing darts this way for a while. I was taught by somebody at Apparel Arts in San Francisco.
Mhm.
And what's nice about it is that you're less likely to get a dimple at the end of the dart.
Mm.
It's
Yeah.
such a clean edge. It's really nice.
Well, especially for transparent fabrics, just not
Yeah.
having that extra thread bunch there is always such a nice thing. And also it's strong. If you're making a tuck, you don't have to worry about back tacking or anything, because it's not going to come loose because the thread is folded over on itself.
Mm.
So other
Will
questions?
you be teaching a class on couture finishing techniques or couture techniques?
Well, I should do that for the summer, because I have all of these videos that I teach at FIT, and I could do like a little, like a mini, like 3-session,
Mhm.
like
Voila.
hors d'oeuvre assortment of little techniques like this. I should look at that for the summer. So
I will sign up.
yeah, keep posted, watch my Instagram, so you'll see it there. And I will also send out, because I have a mailing list, which is nice. So now, would you all like to see how the lining gets done?
Yeah.
Mm.
Okay,
Mhm.
so because this, like I said, this is my friend Jackie, and it's a beautiful coat. You'll see it truly is. And now that it has a new lining, she's wearing it again, which I'm very pleased about. But yeah, don't ever let your linings get in this bad a condition. But if you see how I did this, if you have a coat that you need relined, then you'll know how to proceed.
This is the story of Adele. This is a vintage coat by Adele Simpson, and she has come to my studio needing a new lining. So I'll give a spin so you can see what she looks like from all angles.
Wow.
So pretty.
It's a beautiful coat.
You can see she's a swingback coat and beautifully made. So what she's coming here for, like I said, was a lining. I will outline the process because her lining was in sad shape. But here she is.
I'm going to stop this for a minute. Look at that pattern match.
Yeah.
It really, and the pockets on the front match too. This was fancy ready to wear, but the standards of ready to wear back in the 50s were what they call couture now. So here she is.
So here is the coat laid out. You can see it's an Adele Simpson. This is probably from the 1950s. It's quite a lovely coat. And it's a swingback coat. I'll go into a little bit of detail later, but look at the matching on those pockets. Isn't that amazing? It's a beautifully made coat. This was probably high-end ready to wear, but the finishing is quite lovely. I'm going to pan over here, and there is the lining. We'll see it momentarily, but she needs a new lining. And so that's what we're going to get. So I'll show you some details on this. So as I said, look at the matching on that pocket. It's quite wonderful. The buttons are not what you would call avant-garde, but they definitely work, and I believe they are original to this coat. they need to be restitched, but we will take care of that later. Now, what I find really fascinating about this coat, I'm going to open it up on the hem here. So what you can see is the hem in this area here. I need to put that up a little bit. It's come loose. The center back seam. And my guess is, you can see how the seam allowances aren't dead parallel. My guess is that they sort of played around with the seam to get the seam to match and didn't really worry so much about whether these two seam allowances were the same width. But what's customary on a coat like this is a swing back coat, is the coat itself. If you look at the hem itself is really a little bit ragged here. When we get over to, here, I'll just bring it up to the camera here. So it looks a little ragged. It's just a light catch stitch. But then when we get about a third of the way in, you can see that the raw edge is turned under and it's hemmed. Because as you'll see in the finished coat, the object here is that the lining, which I'll bring in a moment to show you, the lining is not as full as the full sweep of the garment. So it's hemmed to the garment at a certain place, but then this part here around to the center back, the two are hemmed separately. So it's sort of a hybrid. It's a closed lining / drop lining. The drop lining would be back here. So next, I'm going to bring in the lining to show you how the lining is cut, because in these particular garments, the lining is not as full as the coat itself. So here we are. What I've done is I've sort of placed the lining in the position where it would join the facing. And if you look down in here, you see that the fold here, that's the fold, the center back fold, or it's actually a seam of the lining, is slightly smaller than the garment itself. It's interesting that it's cut on this center back fold is on somewhat of a bias. And you can see here, we have a side seam on the lining, which we don't have on the body. Let me take this away. Because you can see here, the front is cut as one full piece. There's no seaming. That's quite a wide piece of fabric. So they needed to put a seam in the lining to make it economical to cut. And the lining is a little bit narrower so that you don't create a bind inside the garment. So now let me just show you the lining. Okay, here we are. Now, bring this out here. Okay, see this here, this is where the lining joined the facing. I wish I had taken some video before I removed the lining, but sorry, I decided this after. So the lining is hand finished to the hem allowance to the side seam, which then coincides. You know, there's this here, this finishes to the hem allowance here. So then here, since the edge of the hem allowance is turned under on the body, they do a similar thing on the lining. So that is, I mean, you can tell it's come down over the years, but this was turned, stitched, and blind hemmed in its original life. So this is a hybrid. This is it's quite a wonderful cut, quite a wonderful coat. And as I showed you in the initial video after everything was done, it's quite beautiful, has a lot of good movement. So next, we're going to look more at the lining. So here we are. This is the lining. And I may have said earlier with my reference to this Dead Sea Scrolls, this is kind of what we're dealing with. We have a lining that has seen far better days. So what I would say, if you have a coat and the lining looks like it's starting to get a little ratty, have it repaired before you get to this point. So what I'm going to have to do is the sleeve here looks relatively intact. Let me just turn this over here. Yeah, I got a little bit of a split here, but it's a clean split. So what I will probably do is take this sleeve off and then looking over here, see if this sleeve is in better shape somewhat. And this armhole here is in a little better shape, but this is where you get out the painter's tape. You want to actually, what I will do, I will go off camera. I'm going to flip this over, and on the front, I'm going to mark the stitching lines. I'm going to mark some matching notches, and I'm going to get these pieces separated, because what we want to do before we actually get a pattern is we want to get it pasted together as best we can. And then we're going to have to do a little guesswork, kind of like archaeologists did with the Dead Sea Scrolls. Okay, this is the center back seam. So looking at the two sleeves, this sleeve here, the armhole looks a little more intact, even though you have a few more tears on the actual body. And so then scanning over to here, this sleeve is a little more shredded, but the armhole seems to give me a little more information. So what I will do now, back over here, I made a mark where the shoulder seam hits. So I know on the sleeve, that's where the shoulder seam hits. Now, it's a little bit difficult to discern where these marks here hit because everything has torn loose. So what I'm going to do next, I'm going to cut these two sleeves free from the bodice, and then I will open out the shoulder seams and lay this out to see which side I'm going to use, or if I have to sort of make a pastiche of both sides to make one. Now notice I'm cutting right on the stitching line. You don't have to take the seams out for this. You're not reassembling this. So why would you waste time cutting everything or picking all these seams out? You can cut everything apart. It also, the beauty of this is if you're cutting along the stitching lines instead of ripping everything apart, you're less likely to stretch something. I mean, you're kind of playing it fast and loose here, but as you can see, I'm cutting this, and see, it's a ready-to-wear garment. So it was good ready to wear, but it was ready to wear. So some of this stuff is a little bit crooked. We'll have to clean that up in the pattern making. You can see here, I'm cutting right on the stitching line as best I can. And so I'm gonna come down to here and then get that clip. Let's see, has that freed everything up? Okay, so I have one of the sleeves. So now what I can do is I can come in here, and I've made a matching notch because we have a little bit of a tuck for the shoulder, for the shaping in the front. And I will just cut right on that stitching line. So here we are. I will go do that to the other sleeve, lay everything out flat, and show you the result. So here we have the entire lining laid out flat without the sleeves. And so really what you're looking for is any kind of clues as to what is missing that you need to sort of fill in. So now this one over here, this armhole is a little more tattered, but what I liked about this one, you can see the seam allowances remained intact. So that is roughly what the shape of that seam allowance, or the armhole seam, is going to be. I would bow it in a little bit at the front, but this is where we get out the blue tape and start taping. Because what I will use is this half of the pattern to generate the paper pattern, and I will use the other sleeve. I think the other sleeve came off this one here to use the sleeve. You only need half of this, obviously, because you're cutting it on the fold. So I will return with the blue tape. We will talk about what I'm doing then. Now I'm going to try to stay out of the way of the camera as best I can. You can see here I adjusted this seam allowance a little bit. Armholes are a little deeper in the front, a little flatter in the back. And so this may not be scientific, but it works. So I'm going to use my painter's tape and just come in here, just smack that down. It may seem unscientific, it may seem a little bit ad hoc. That's really what I want to do. I'm not going to tape that because that's split on the seam, so I'm just going to sever this right along the seam. But before I do that, what I plan on doing, some matching notches, because we want to know that these are going to match up. So it's just good to have matching notches as you go. So yeah, that may not be pretty, but it works. So my next step, which I will do off camera, is I'm going to come in here. Well, actually, I should just do it now. You can see. I'm going to take the scissors and just cut right along this stitching line. Because again, you don't have to take the seams out because you're not going to be putting this back together. You just want to take this apart for a pattern. So you don't need to actually go through all that extra work. So you can see here, I'm cutting it along here. And this little scoop in here, I think now I will just put a little bit of tape there just to solidify it. There we go. So from here, I'm going to just take this off and flip it over, and I will show you the result. So here you can see you have the outline of the armhole on both sides. And I have cut the seam all the way down. At this point, you can get rid of any of these seam allowances if you need to, because this is pretty much ready to copy off onto fresh paper. That will be next. Now, one other consideration before I start copying this off. I wanted to determine the grain lines. And if you look at the coat, the grain lines are pretty much parallel to the center front. And so this edge here, which joins the front facing, I'm making parallel. So this is the lengthwise grain. And you just want to determine a crosswise grain. And you can just do that by pulling the fabric crosswise. You're estimating a little bit. Now here, I was able to see a lengthwise grain, and there was a snag that created the crosswise grain here. So I think it's kind of interesting that they have put the seam here because the entire coat is cut as one. And I think their aim was that they want all of this to drape in a similar manner to the back of the coat. That's why this is not cut with the straight of grain on the center back, because that is the center back seam. So you can see here, the hem kind of, the roll hem finishes here, then this is actually what sews to the hem allowance on the garment. This hangs free. So now we have some grain lines. And one thing I've done at the shoulder is I went ahead, you can see kind of up in here, I marked the pleat at the shoulder, and it's now 7 o'clock, just in case you're wondering. So I will take this over to the pressing table, press it out, roll out some paper, and meet you back here. So here I have the front spread out on a piece of paper. I'm going to try to stay out of the camera's way, but I may not be able to totally do that. So the first step really is to trace around and up along the stitching lines, because what we're going to be doing is we're going to be making a pattern with stitching lines. Now, eventually I will add the seam allowances that are indicated on the lining, so I can just sew this in by machine. But there are certain things, like for example, this little pleat up at the top. I'll mark that pleat. Mark shoulder. Also the lengthwise and crosswise grains. And if it shifts a little bit, don't sweat it. We can true all this up later. We just want to get the information onto the paper where it's a little more solid. Now, if this lining were in decent shape, I would have just used the lining itself to cut the pattern or to cut the new lining. But like I said, this is kind of like the Dead Sea Scrolls. So we're coming up here. And then this is where the armhole, the information that we have somewhat sort of patched together, is going to come in handy. So I'm going to follow this. We can true up the armhole later, and I'll show you how to do that. Yes, I think we have everything. So now I will go off camera and trace off the back and bring you the results. So here we have the front and the back, as you can see. These are all the stitching lines. Now, mark your patterns like you're going to be stricken with amnesia at any moment, because if you don't, you will be. So next, I want to get the information from the sleeves. So here we have the sleeve that I chose that has more information. You can see here on the front, matching notches, double matching notches for the back of the sleeve. And there is the notch that I made when it was actually still attached to the body. Now this really, again, is a simple matter. Coming in and just cutting right on the stitching line. Now what I will have to do after I have everything separated, so we have a little bit of fraying here, I'm going to have to come in here and do some bandaging with the painter's tape, which is no big deal. Like I said, I chose this one because it is in less sad shape than the other one. And so here, yes. So that's, yeah, there we are. So there we have two pieces separated. So now let me just slip the upper sleeve out. Now you can see it's a little ragged, but that's okay, because we're just going to pull that together a little bit and tape on it. Now, one thing I did do before I brought this over here is I pressed it out a little bit. And so now that we have this, get rid of that. Now I can figure out what the grain lines are. And this is just, you know, you look at the back of the fabric, you can see the grain line on the back of the fabric a little more readily than you can on the front with the satin. So that is the grain line here. And there are times, like I said, you just have to guess. I've done this enough so I can sort of figure it out. But a lot of times the fabric will give you a clue. So if you pull it this way and pull it this way, you can kind of see that, okay, there's a cross grain and oh, there it is, there's the lengthwise grain. Now, there are some general rules for certain kinds of things. On a garment, a lot of times the grain line will be perpendicular to the hem, and it looks pretty much like that's what's happening here. On some of these two-part sleeves, the grain line will be a little different. So now we have that. So we have our upper sleeve, we have our undersleeve. So I will take these off camera and trace them also onto the paper with the matching notches and bring them back here to show you. So here we have the front pieces. And what you can see here, I like to measure the two side seams. That's this here is the side seam on the back lining. Side seam on the front. You want to make sure that they measure the same length because the two of them actually sew together. And so if I needed to adjust, I would adjust down here. Easiest way to go. So now I'm going to show you, it's called walking a seam. This is shoulder. There is the notch where the little pleat is that's going to be joining to the front. Walking a seam. See, I've kind of done the work already, but I'm just going to take you through the process. Just turn this down. There we are. Okay. So I'm assuming this is the folded edge. This is where the lining will join to the facing of the body. So that's where I line it up. And so my pleat matches there. But then you want to jump across the pleat. You don't want to include that in because that's extra. And so then you can see here, I had to come down. There we are. I had to come down a little bit to make the two shoulder seams match. Now, pattern making wise, if you see little slashes, how I learned it was that line cancels, and circles are the lines you keep. So what I've done here is I really wanted to make sure that pieces well, because the next step is going to be measuring the armhole. So you can see here that I've pinned the shoulder seam together. Now you can measure this in 2 goes, but I think for what we're going to be doing here, it's a little easier to see just what we're doing. So you're going to take the tape. Now I'm going to talk about this for a moment. Don't stand the tape up on his edge. It marks you as someone who's not in the know. My teacher Simone smacked my hand when she saw me do that the first time. So what you're going to do is you're going to walk, and you can walk it. You can use a pencil point, you can use your thumbnail or fingernail, but you're laying the edge of the tape and walking it. And some people will want to help you and hold that end. Tell them no, it needs to move freely. So what I'm doing is walking this. It gives you a better, more accurate measure. And so what we get here, the measurement we get 25 and a half. All good. Our next step is measuring the armhole on the sleeve. So here we have the 2 sleeve pieces, the upper sleeve, the undersleeve. Now, what you can see here on the undersleeve, point this out, you can see that I have the matching notches and I have the finished seam lengths of the sleeve. So when I go to the upper sleeve, you notice it says 15 and a half finished. We need to ease 1/4 inch. So that is on the sleeve front. We're going to ease between the notches 3/4 inch at the back. So in actually justifying correcting the pattern, since I cut this apart, I could see that they're going to be easing a little bit here and easing a little bit here so that the sleeve actually fits the arm better. From here, this is where together, or you can measure them separately, but really, again, it's just a little easier to see for what we're doing. Join these together, match. And so I will, again, walk the tape, starting here. Walk it around. I've already measured this, so just so you're, in case you're wondering. It comes to 26 1/4. So now, 26 1/4, that is the armhole on the sleeve, and then minus 25 1/2, which is the bodice, leaves us 3/4 of an inch cap ease. Now, that is cap ease. That is what you want for a lining. You don't want to have too much extra because it's a lining, it's going to buckle otherwise. So in this particular exercise, I'm going to pat myself on the back for a little bit. I was able to kind of figure out just by what the shreds of the garment were giving me, what the shape of the armhole on the bodice was, what the shape of the armhole on the sleeve was. So what I will do before I actually cut is I will add the seam allowances. I'll refer back to the pieces of fabric to see what seam allowances we need, as it will tell us. And so most of them are going to be 1/2 inch. The hem allowance obviously is going to be 1.5 inches. The up in here, again, I'll have to refer to the other pieces, but this is where I will not use the dual tracing wheel and the carbon paper. I will construct this like it was constructed originally by adding the required seam allowances and just sewing it to the garment. So we have our patterns, we have the sleeves, of course, we have the bodice pieces, because so the next step really is to figure yardage, go by the fabric and cut it out. And so I will meet you back after it's cut out. Now it occurred to me, as you can see here, I have all of my cutting lines marked. It occurred to me that I didn't mark matching notches. You can see this here and this here, because I want to know how the sleeve matches up to the body. Now, normally I match at the underarm when I'm drafting, but I didn't really have any kind of indications on the fabric itself because all of this area in here was pretty much gone. So this is my reasoning. This is how I came to figure out where these spots are. Assuming 3/4 inch cap ease, what I did was I know that this matches the shoulder seam. So I measured 3/8 one way, 3/8 the other way, a total of 3/4 of an inch. So I matched this onto here. And I was able to see the paper and walk it down along the seam, matching the stitching lines. And that is what got me this here. So this distance from here to here equals this distance from here to here. And similarly, on the other side, since we're working with the back of the sleeve, I matched that notch here. Walked everything down. Where I got that one there. So this distance here equals this distance here. 8 o'clock with the brilliant idea. So what you can do if you want to worry about your easing, I actually start the ease about a halfway up. I like the ease down a little further. Some people want it high up here. I like it down a little further. A longer stretch of the seam to ease makes it ease much more readily. So now we have everything marked. We are ready for cutting. As you can see, I have everything cut out. I will sew this all together and bring you back the lining before I install it. So I'm back with the lining. And aside from sewing the sleeves in, what I have done is pressed up the cuffs about 3/8 of an inch. This makes it easier for hand finishing. And on the hem, here is the center back. And the hem hems to the side seam, because this part, as you can see, I've hemmed it with a blind hem. And then this will sew to the hem of the garment. So this part is loose. So that is really what you need to know. So what I will do next is install this into the code. I'm not going to really do any video on that because it's pretty straightforward. And here we are. Our lady has her lining in. You can see here. I'll give you a little more detail in a moment, but you can see it's all sewn in. And where she's headed now is going to be the dry cleaner. She needs to get a dry cleaning and a steaming to be absolutely perfect. So let me show you some details. So here we have the inside. All of this area here was what was shattered in the original lining. So I was able to figure out what I needed to do to replace that. Now, also, I just like showing this little corner detail. Turned out rather nicely, if I say so myself. So when you're lining, what I did is from the inside, I sewed the seam allowances of the armhole on the lining to the coat. And I did a little tack. You can kind of see it right. Well, it pulls a little bit. You want to tack the underarm so that everything stays put. Other than that, it's primarily a machine installation down to the hem. And so from here, this is hand closed, and then this is put up by hand. Let's see. Until roughly the side seam. And as you saw earlier, it's hemmed separately. And this really partly is because the sweep of the coat is a little longer than the sweep of the lining, and partly because two separate layers move a little more independently than the two layers sewn together. So yeah, here we are. It's all in pretty good shape. Other than that, I may go in there and just check and make sure that the hemming is solid before I send it to the cleaners. But here we have it. So our lady has her lining, and I will take it to the cleaners and bring it back when she's done and in her perfection. And that is the story of how Adele got her lining back. I hope you've enjoyed it.
Are your brains like numb?
No, that's great.
No, I'm wanting to get sewing.
Well, see, this is where I'm really grateful for my pattern making training, because figuring out, okay, how do I replace what's there? I was able to reason it out because there are just, certain rules that we know from pattern making. So, and I got really lucky on that lining. It is maybe just a touch darker, but it's exactly the color.
Oh,
And that was just dumb luck,
I was like, wait, that's the same color. And I was like, how did he match that?
It was, my husband, who's very sensitive to color, he's like, how did you get that? I said, it was one of those times, because I really hate going to Mood. I really do. And I went in there and I had a piece of this, and, I walked up to one of the salespeople and he's like, oh, the silk is over there. I'm like, you didn't wait for me to ask the question. And it wasn't silk. This was like probably an acetate and rayon. That's my guess. And it was I was looking for that particular fabric idea. I would have taken it in a blue if that was what was available, but yeah, it was just dumb luck. I was in the right place at the right time, and I found the perfect lining. And so now my friend Jackie is very, very happy that she has her. For her, she said that that's like the early morning, because if she has to go out like before she gets herself together to get coffee, she said, all I need is sunglasses, lipstick, and this coat. And, I mean, obviously something to wear on the bottom, but she said, there is just something about that coat, lipstick, sunglasses. She can go anywhere and feel dressed. So
It looks put together, even if she isn't really yet.
Yeah. Oh yeah. So I'm very pleased. And I had forgotten how much, because see, I remembered the coat vaguely, but she had come to visit here one time, and we were at Housing Works, which is one of the nicer thrift shops. And she put the coat on, and I was just like, you got to have this coat. And the lady came by and said, oh, well, those are half off today. And so she paid $14 for this coat.
wow.
So I just, and I'd forgotten that when she sent me the coat, she said, you do remember that you arm twisted me to get this coat, and then it was $14. Like, yeah, I would have arm twisted you to get that coat for $44 or $84. But it's a gorgeous coat, beautifully made. And
So I have a couple of questions.
yes,
The ease in the seam of the sleeve, that's to give you more movement,
well,
to allow for more
it
movement.
creates a little more shape, because as a rule in a two-part tailored sleeve, there's generally ease on the back seam for the shoulder dart. Because what it does is it helps the fabric cup around the bend of the arm. I've never seen ease on the front. Usually on the front you would stretch it, to get that shape. So that was a surprise to me when I was looking at that. But I wanted to make it exactly as it came, and so that's why I stuck with using the ease on it.
And also, what was the pencil that you used to mark the match points?
Well, those are just regular, let's see if I have one here.
Pencils.
Just artist, oh, darn it. One moment, please. These are, I think, the Barrel Prismacolor Sanford.
Oh, that's all it is. Okay.
Yeah, they're nothing fancy. It's just, anything to leave a mark, because, nothing fancy.
Okay.
So, other questions?
You said in that you were looking for an acetate rather than a silk. Do you sew mostly with natural fabrics, or do you?
It depends.
Don't discriminate.
See, I am not a silk snob. There are certain times, I would avoid lining a coat with polyester, because it's like wearing a hefty bag. But like an acetate and rayon, there's a little more breathability and also, for that particular kind of lining, it stands up a little more to wear. Silk can be a little bit hot to wear, but for a coat, that's not a big deal. If I couldn't have found that fabric, and really it was just dumb luck, I found exactly the fabric, I would have gone with like a Duchess satin. I think, that it may have been a little bit stiffer, but over time, once she wore the coat, it would have relaxed a little bit. So no, I'm not a silk snob.
No, not just silk, linen, cotton,
They're
such as
nice.
those.
They're nice. I'm working on this Mother of the Bride dress. That's what this is right here. That's all silk. And it's chiffon. But I stuck a high price on it, hoping that she would say no. And she said, okay. And I was like, okay, then I'm gonna. So yeah, so today was sewing silk, but one thing I did cheat on this. I block fused the silk crepe because I hate working with that fabric, and it has made it a lot easier to work. Because I figure, okay, the chiffon is going to be the nosebleed. So, and because it's going to be the dress and then a chiffon kind of long jacket to go over it, Mother of the Bride.
I got a question.
Yeah.
I got a chiffon question because I did the same thing so far with a jacket I'm making for Susan's projects. And it was a rayon that's very silky, and I starched it till a bird couldn't fly.
Yeah.
And ironed it and got it all. Can I do the same thing with chiffon so that I stand a chance being a mere mortal trying to sew it?
I wouldn't. There actually, I just got the roll of it. There is this paper. There's medical examining paper. There are two kinds. There's one that's kind of the shiny, crisp
thick stuff. Yeah.
This is called the crepe finish, and I don't know if you can see it, but it's kind of a matte finish. And what I like about this is that the fabric doesn't slip over it as readily.
Okay.
And so what I do, and I'm going to have to just take this to FIT on a Sunday and get my magic key and open a door. Yes, I'm sworn to secrecy as to where I got that. You have one layer of paper on the table. You put out your chiffon. You have another layer of paper, and you cut everything single layer.
Okay.
And so what I'm planning on doing, because I'm just kind of, scared of all this, I'm going to cut it with the 1/2 inch seam allowances. I'm not marking any stitching lines on this because the coat isn't really fitted. I'm going to actually thread baste in the seam allowance to hold the 2 layers of paper together.
Okay.
And then, and then you're going to use a fairly short stitch, like a 2.0 stitch, and that's going to make the paper tear away more easily.
Okay.
So that's how I'm handling all of that.
All right. Because like Linda was saying, I'm wanting to do more of that. And I will get with Linda Maynard. I start her tailoring class next week, but
yes,
I will email her, like, if you don't decide to do a blouse class, I know she has individual time where you can say,
I have said to her, you need to do a blouse class. There are people asking for it.
Oh, yes, please.
And so, what I would say is, email her, say, Kenna said, because she kind of does what I say. Okay. Sometimes it takes her a little longer to get there than others, but, and I mean, when she says, Kenneth, you need to do this, I'm like, okay, I'll do it.
You guys listen to each other.
Well, you see, this is someone asked me about, sources, because there is so much internet information on sewing. And I saw this on a video and and what I say is, okay, just there a lot of times you see stuff and you think just because you can doesn't mean you should.
Sure.
And so, first thing I'll say is like, okay, does common sense suggest a simpler solution? And if the answer is yes, then go with your common sense. But the other thing I say is I have a very short list of people I talk to as far as asking about, anything like these kinds of fabrics or chiffons or that sort of thing, Linda Maynard. Susan is the one I ask about, okay, what is the absolute couture correct way of doing something? She's the one I ask. Judy Newcomb of Threads, I talk to her. Sandra Betsina, I look at her for, you know, just if you really need to get it done quickly and you want it to look good, Sandra has the techniques for that. And her Fabric Savvy book, if you don't have it, is an excellent book to have. It's what I love about it is you can tell it was written by someone who sews. You want to sew a silk noir, you open it up. Everything, the foot, the thread, the needle, how hot the iron is, any pressing tools you need, any other special feet, it's all on one page. It's brilliant. So if you
I
don't,
use that book all the
it's an
time.
excellent
And
book.
yeah, I've told more people about the book. I think I have every edition.
Yes. So
It's
yes, you know,
really
because
good.
the book by the other author beforehand, you know, I don't want to read about the molecular composition of polyester. I want to know, like, okay, what needle, what thread, what stitch length, is there going to be anything, you know, that's what you need, you know.
I mean, to be fair, the molecular composition of polyester is interesting,
It is,
but not practical.
but when you need to just get the damn thing done, you know, Sandra's book is where you go. You open it up, it's all on one page. It's there. So yeah.
When I need this lining done in the morning and it's 2 a.m. and I'm over it
Yeah.
already, I don't need to know what the melting point is.
Yeah. So yeah. So that's.
What about Claire Schaefer?
Hola.
Moment.
I love her.